rare and balanced view on politics in today's world. Based on facts, born of rationality, common sense, and logic, providing context on today's events. This is American Perspective with Rick Thomas.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to American Perspective. I am your host, Rick. Boy, my stomach is starting to kind of be tied up in knots. Let me tell you, this is like pre-game jitters. Tomorrow is the game, and it is an all-day long thing, if not even more. Wow, I don't know about you guys, but this is definitely the most consequential election of our lifetimes. It is the election where America will get to decide whether they get to stay as a constitutional republic, or if we continue down the path of Marxist, socialist, communist, Leninist, Stalinist totalitarianism under the Democrats. Folks, I mean, there's been a lot of stuff going on all the way up until this election. The candidates were out today in Pennsylvania. They were definitely trying to, garner in those last votes. The Keystone State seems to be the key as of right now, based on, well, we'll get into that in a minute. But but first, let's go ahead and get this kicked off properly with the Pledge of Allegiance. This time, it's going to be led by our very own G. So, if you are of mind, please stand, remove your hats if you're wearing one. And if not, at least put your hand over your heart and join in with us on the Pledge of Allegiance as recited by G.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And, of course, I thank you, G, for sending in that wonderful rendition of the Pledge of Allegiance. If you would like to hear your rendition of the Pledge of Allegiance done here on the program, all you have to do is record yourself reciting the pledge in your style, and then take that audio file, attach it to an email, put in the address of fans, F-A-N-S, at americanperspective.online. That's fans at americanperspective.online, and you can get your rendition of the pledge put into the cycle. I'll get it into the rotation as well. All right, tonight I just want to highlight this wonderful flag colored shirt that I'm wearing. The red, white, and blue, the stripes. I'm going to wear a suit coat tomorrow, I think. Anyway, you can get a shirt like this. You can look just like me. Well, hopefully not just like me, because, I do have a face for radio. But hopefully you'll look like me in a shirt anyway, by going to theflagshirt.com. That's theflagshirt.com. And here, let me show you. Let me show you where it is. There it is. Theflagshirt.com is running a Veterans Day sale right now. Put in, and it's site-wide too, by the way, put in Veteran 10 at checkout in the promo box, and you'll get 10% off site-wide. All of their products. This is just for Veterans Day, and it is ending soon, by the way. So Veteran 10, VETERAN 10 at checkout, and you can get 10% off site-wide at theflagshirt.com. They have men's, women's, kids, made in the USA. They have accessories. They've got all kinds of stuff. Plus, they have a little section where they say election gear for the elections, which, of course, is tomorrow. Go to theflagshirt.com, get 10% off site-wide using code VETERAN10, VETERAN 10. It's run by a veteran, so that's why. Hello. And they support all American holidays. Also, too, if you decide to purchase $75 or more on theflagshirt.com, you will get automatic free shipping. Go to theflagshirt.com and get yourself patriotized. Oof. I'm failing here. I'm forgetting what I'm doing. Oh, goodness. Anyway, all right. So that's... All right, so here we go. And like I said, I've got like pregame jitters here. I haven't felt this way about an election for a I don't think I ever have, honestly. To be, completely fair, I really don't think. I mean, I've never really gotten into. This is clearly a history-making course starting correction, okay, in terms of the path of the country. And yeah, I am I can't even imagine. So first of all, the polls, let's take a last look. I'm going to just a last final look. Now I got to be honest with you, I got a little panicked. Not so much that I was worried because, I mean, let's face it, seriously, all of this is in God's hands, okay? So, we got to put our worry into God. So and hand it over to him because this is all on him. That being said, that's still, there's still some butterflies and stuff in the stomach. But here on Polymarket, which, by the way, Polymarket is the betting marketplace. So here on Polymarket, this is tonight's current forecast. They've got Trump just under 60% of the vote, 60% likely to win, and Kamala Harris just a little over 40% likely to win. They show that Pennsylvania, at least based on people, the money that people have been putting into it, that Pennsylvania is going to slide over to the Republicans, which I've gone through some of the math, and I got to tell you, if Pennsylvania goes to the Republicans, and that's assuming that the election counts come in tomorrow night for Pennsylvania. But again, if Pennsylvania goes the Republicans' way, that will likely lock it for Trump. Same for Kamala Harris. If Pennsylvania goes her way, that will likely lock it up for her. So Pennsylvania, the Keystone State, again, is the key because right now, Georgia and North Carolina have been polling, showing that they are in Trump's column fairly solidly, although Georgia, all of the swing states, unfortunately, via the polling, and this is in realclearpolling.com, this is how they anticipate the map to look. Yeah, so this is, again, they're assuming at this point, based on the fine line, we're talking some serious fine lines. For an example, Pennsylvania, Trump versus Harris is at a 0.3, according to the Real Clear polling averages. So it is like extremely razor thin here, well within the margin of error on any one poll. And there have been a bunch of outliers, which, of course, both the Democrats and Republicans grab onto those outliers. But mostly the last day has been the Democrats, because the Democrats are, they put out this thing about Iowa all of a sudden having like a Kamala Harris plus something, +3 or whatever. And yeah, it just anyway. So one thing that has been reported is that, for an example, especially in Georgia, the rural vote has come out in mass and in force right now. It appears that a lot of rural voters in Georgia have come out, and generally speaking, not always, but generally speaking, rural counties tend to vote Democrat. I'm sorry, tend to vote Republican. My bad. So rural counties tend to vote Republican. So that is a very good sign for this. And at this moment, it looks like Georgia's going to go Trump's way. But even Georgia has, only a 1.7 average according to Real Clear polling here. So again, all of this is still way too many. Like I said, this is going to come down. This is kind of like Bush v. Gore with Florida level stuff. Okay. So yeah. Let's just say this is going to be a tight race, and it's going to come down to the wire. Well, everybody, of course, has been sitting there and talking about doing their last ditch efforts, their last pushes. And today, Trump and Harris both held dueling rallies in Pennsylvania itself. And many political strategists, many people like myself, some others, have all been saying that Pennsylvania is clearly ground zero in this whole race. And of course, I mean, it's the biggest out of all of the swing states. It's the one that has the most votes, 19 electoral votes, I should say, 19. And it's very difficult. I mean, if you don't get Pennsylvania, you would have to sweep every single one of the other swing states for the most part. I mean, again, my math may be off a little bit, but generally speaking, you would have to pick up almost the vast majority of the other swing states if you were going to win. So Pennsylvania is key about this entire thing. And that shows, based on all of the money and everything else that the Democrats and Republicans have been putting in, the effort that they've been putting into Pennsylvania. They are really pushing in Pennsylvania. So Vice President Harris made a last-minute pitch to her supporters in the biggest of battlegrounds. She jumped around in Allentown, Pittsburgh, and Philadelphia. She hit all three. She'll begin her final day with a canvas kickoff in Scranton, and also will try and make a stop in Reading or Reading. However, we have a Reading over here in California, so I don't know how you guys pronounce it over there on the East Coast. But anyway, former President Donald Trump held a rally on Sunday, and on Monday, Trump returns to the state to hit Reading or Reading and Pittsburgh. That's today. So yeah, they really want Pennsylvania. And that's, of course, it's the biggest prize among the 7 key battleground states. And this one here, in terms of Pennsylvania, has been back and forth the entire election season, for the most part, and looks like it's going to be really thin margins, even though, I mean, it had really thin margins in 2020, deciding President Biden for the victory. So this is definitely, oh man, we've really got to win Pennsylvania. And I know that there's been a lot of push for that. But the advantage that we have, of course, is that early voting that we have going on, the statistics that we seem to be seeing from these early votes, is that so far anyway, the Republicans seem to be voting early and in what would be considered greater numbers than ever before. Well, I mean, let's be honest. Republicans generally believe in the idea that voting should be done on Election Day. Okay. And what needs to happen in terms of all of our voting, there's been some questions with regards to the early voting, maybe potentially, what do they call that? Hijacking or taking away from votes on Election Day. So, again, low propensity voters seem to be coming out a lot more. So I'm hoping hoping that this bodes a good sign for us, meaning for the Republicans, for Americanism, America first scenario, for sure. Well, there's a couple of pundits, left-wing pundits, that are out there. One of them being David Axelrod. Now, do you remember David Axelrod is the big guy who masterminded the Obama wins. And, well, let's just say he is not all that confident about what's going on. So here in the Daily Fetched, you can see David Axelrod looks spooked as he admits support may not materialize for Harris on Election Day. So keep in mind, too, okay, keep in mind as well that the Democrats typically are the ones who do all of the early voting. So, again, early signs, don't take them to 100% heart. You know, I mean, anything can happen. We could be looking at something very strange. The Democrats could come out on Election Day. It's not their typical pattern, but from that particular sense, though, David Axelrod is questioning, because he's actually admitting that there's no guarantee that voters will actually turn out for Vice President Harris on Election Day. Now, here, let's just listen to his words.
Most worried about right now?
Well, look, the watchword of the day is humility here. When you have polls that are this close, and I'm sitting next to one of the great pollsters, and I think she would tell you, when you have polls this close, you're not sure of anything. And it really matters who shows up, because these polls are not precise. So what I'm worried about is you're counting on some women who are independent Republican women to come out and vote for Harris. Is that going to materialize? Is the gender gap going to be what you need it to be? Are minority voters going to come out in the numbers of African-American voters in particular, and are you going to get the margins that you want there? So there are a lot of open questions, and they're obviously working it hard right now. There are feet on the street, and they're doing the kind of work that you do in a race like this. But this race is filled with uncertainty today.
What is...
And he is not wrong. So anyway, again, it's one of those things that we've just got to be patient. We've got to understand that nobody, I don't think, is going to be able to declare necessarily an early victory. Okay. So let's just see what happens here. But anyway, Axelrod in the interview also tried to reassure Democrats by saying that President Trump is not closing well with a final message before the election. He said, quote, he is actually abetting her message in the final week. That's going to make Republicans uncomfortable. I'm sure they would love him to stay tethered to that prompter a bit more and deliver the message that they think will help him win the election, Axelrod said. He also said, but he's not closing well. She's closing in a much more disciplined way. I disagree. I totally disagree with that. And the reason being is because of the fact that we had the whole garbage incident and so on and so forth. I personally think Trump is actually closing fairly well. So yeah, it's going to be a nail biter, people. That's literally what it is. It's going to be a nail biter, and it's going to come to the end. And there are going to be some places, some areas, some spots where it's not going to. We're probably not going to know. So I'm just prepping you ahead of time, even though I'm planning on streaming starting at 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern time, my regular time. Okay. And I am planning on going as late, possibly as late as potentially midnight Eastern. Okay. That's the hours that I'm kind of framing this in. So we'll just have to kind of see what happens. And by the way, speaking of that, I'm planning on tapping into at least four different feeds to gain, election insights and things like that. I'll be, swapping back and forth just so you guys understand and know what to expect for election night. So yeah, that's kind of the scenario. That's kind of the scenario that we're going to be dealing with for tomorrow night. Now, all of that being said, it's not just Axelrod who is starting to kind of look at things a little interestingly. It's also this guy who is showing that early voting numbers are scary for Harris. Democrats are panicking. This is according to a former Obama campaign manager. And so Republicans have focused on convincing voters to cast ballots early, which again, like I said, is traditionally a voting method more favored by Democrats. Now, I can tell you here in Washington, okay, we haven't even hit a 50% return rate yet. But that being said, and that's statewide. Some counties are higher, obviously some counties are lower. But that being said, you also have to understand that we're all mail-in voting. So as long as the votes are postmarked by tomorrow, then they will be accepted later. So we're looking at possibly 2, maybe 3 days before we finally hit the numbers and figure things out. But I guarantee you that even though that's going to be the case here in Washington, I guarantee you all of the pundits are basically going to say Washington is going for Harris. I hate that. That's just how it is. Because apparently, people believe that the left coast is always the left coast. And that is exactly why I have the understanding and would love to see where we would have 0 states doing winner take all that for the electoral votes. But it is what it is. 48 do that. And there you go. All right. So Obama's campaign manager, back to this piece in Fox News. He was his 2012 campaign manager, Jim Messina, said on MSNBC early Sunday that the voting numbers are scary for Harris as the data shows Republicans making significant gains with early voting in the battleground states. And of course, they're comparing that to 2020. Now, keep in mind, mail-in voting appears and the absentee balloting appears to have dropped off from 2020 because, of course, 2020 was a requirement in most states. But now it's not anymore because we're no longer in the pandemic scenario. So those things have been dropping off. The hope is, of course, that many people are going to come out on Election Day. Now, I'm going to recommend that if you are coming out on Election Day, you go to the polls early. Get in line early so they don't pull shenanigans like trying to cut you off from getting in and voting at any particular polling station. Voting station. Please, 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 please take this seriously because we really need to make sure that we that everybody votes as much as they can, because again, this country we're in a crux. We're at a crossroads, and we need to figure out which way the country is actually going to go. Now, Messina said on Inside with Jen Psaki, he said that the early voting numbers are a little scary when asked what the Harris campaign's biggest concerns are days before the election. Messina added, the Republicans didn't do what they did last time. Last time, Trump said don't early vote, so they didn't. Republicans do have an advantage in early vote numbers. When the early vote comes in, it's going to look a little bit different than 2020, and that is scary, he says. But also, he also said Democrats are pleased with the early turnout of 2 key voting blocs, women and young voters. Demographics that the Harris campaign is actually banking on. And I guarantee you, those are the 2 voting blocs that she is really and truly after. Messina pointed out that women voters make up 55% of the early voters, and in the past 10 days, young voters in these battleground states are coming out in what looks to be, for early votes, historic numbers. Still, Messina added that the early vote totals have caused lots of, quote, my friends to call me panicking when comparing the data to 2020. So, yeah. It's going to be interesting. Now, according to the piece here, new numbers released in Nevada, which is a key swing state, show historic early voting numbers for Republicans and currently lead, or at least at the time this piece was written, lead Democrats by about 5% in the early vote, which ended in person on Friday. Early voting concluded in the state with 393,811 votes cast for Republicans, with 344,539 for Democrats, and 287,762 for other affiliations, according to that state's Secretary of State's website. So this is, so roughly the $49,000 voted, or dollar, what am I saying? Roughly the 49,000 vote advantage that Republican had over Democrats at the end of the week is a stark contrast from 2020, when Democrats ended early voting with a 43,000 vote advantage. So, it's going to be interesting. Democrat Nevada Congresswoman Dina Titus said, Republicans are kicking our ass at early voting. We cannot let that happen. So also, too, in Georgia, as I pointed out, Republicans appear confident the state's record-setting early voting numbers will favor Trump. Now, keep in mind, folks, in 2020, many of these states, regardless of what the left has been telling you, many of these states came down to just a few thousand votes in terms of a difference. And again, this is part of the reason why this whole winner-take-all concept may not be the best way to do this. Now, the Constitution doesn't state what the states do. The states are in charge of that. So they're the ones that decide whether or not they do winner-take-all. And 48 of them said that they would do winner-take-all. And so that, honestly, in my opinion, is kind of where we ended up right here in terms of this. Now, again, this is going to be a nail biter, and we're going to have to be very, very cognizant of that moving forward. Well, one of the bigger problems that we may have, let's just assume for just a second, let's just play with this for just a second. Let's assume that Donald Trump wins. And I'm not talking like a sweeping landslide 1984 Reagan-style victory. I'm just saying that it comes down toward the end of the night where even if Pennsylvania takes forever to get there, let's just say that he flips, Michigan and Wisconsin and picks up maybe, let's say, Virginia. Those three are kind of like in the gray area, let's say. Okay? And let's just say that he picks those up, meaning Trump. Now, that being said, what would happen if we ended up with a Republican victory and a Trump-Vance victory? Well, first of all, as I talked to you last night, or last Saturday, sorry, this is Monday, I kind of got lost. But as I talked to you last Saturday, be prepared for the left to do anything and everything in order to prevent a Trump victory in terms of all of these, all of the leftist violence. We've got to be prepared for that. However, the Democrats, in particular, this moron known as Jamie Raskin, is kind of doing what the Democrats always say that the Republicans are doing in terms of dog whistling. But he's dog whistling now, saying that they will only accept the election outcome if it is, quote, free and fair. Now, I seem to recall that they said election deniers are the enemy, that they are anti-American, and so on and so forth. Well, this guy has now said, and openly said it, that Democrats will challenge or may challenge the election results if they believe the election had been, quote unquote, stolen. So the question you have to ask, Mr. Raskin, is how do you figure on whether or not something is stolen or not? You guys said and told us in 2020 that it was the most safe and secure election ever. Well, he vowed to honor the results if President Donald Trump wins, provided that the election is, quote, free and fair. The Maryland lawmaker made the comments during appearance on the November 1st edition of HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher, where he echoed comments made by Trump, the presidential nominee, the Republican presidential nominee, who has also promised to accept the results of the election if they are fair and legal. Raskin said, if it's a free and fair election, we will do what we have always done. We will honor it. No, you haven't, Jamie. You haven't. I'm sorry, but you haven't. I mean, Hillary Clinton in 2016 refused to concede for months. In fact, even now, if you get her on an interview, she still has reservations about claiming that he actually won in 2016. They still talk about Russian election interference because it keeps coming back every single year that Trump has been in. But anyway, Raskin, ranking member of the House Oversight Committee, noted that Democrats would potentially challenge the results if they believed the election had been, quote unquote, stolen, echoing language used by many Republicans after the 2020 election. He said, no, we're not going to allow them to steal it in the states or steal it in the Department of Justice or steal it with any other election official in the country, he said. Yeah, right. The Democrat did not provide further details regarding what would constitute a stolen election or how it would be determined. Exactly. That's the point. They won't say what constitutes as a stolen election and what does not. So this is part of the reason why you heard phrases like too big to rig. This is why if you are an American-loving conservative or even a liberal, yes, a liberal who is into the, in the traditional sense of the word, who is into liberty and freedom and making sure that you that government control is abated and held back, you need to go out and vote, even if you are on the fence or you just don't care about. No, I'm telling you, you need to go out and vote. This is extremely, extremely important because if the Democrats get in, and I'm not talking about just the presidency, although the presidency, all eyes are on the presidency. I'm even talking about down ballot. Because if you have the Senate in control of the Democrats and then the House of Representatives in control of the Democrats, we're going to have a really tough 4 years. If you think the last 4 years or 3.5 or whatever plus years have been bad, yeah, just wait until the next 4, because I'm guaranteeing you they will go and destroy the Constitution. They will pack the court. They will bring in Puerto Rico and D.C. as states, even though they technically can't for D.C., but that's the whole point. Now, the piece here in the Epoch Times, to continue here, Raskin was among multiple members of the Congressional Progressive Caucus who objected to the certification of the 2016 election in which Trump won the race against Democrat Hillary Clinton. He also refused to attend Trump's inauguration, writing in a statement at the time that the moral and political legitimacy of this presidency are in the gravest doubt, and that he cannot risk my presence at his inauguration being interpreted as any kind of endorsement of the normality of our situation. Well, that is a bunch of crap, because it was normal. So anyway, Raskin, who led the second impeachment effort against Trump during his appearance on Maher's show, alleged that the former president was trying to commit election fraud during the 2020 presidential race. Like election fraud as in election malfeasance by covering up the Hunter Biden laptop story, which has since come out and been verified as true and correct. Yeah, like that. Okay. Well, I know that we've been focusing, we've constantly been focusing on the we've been focusing constantly on the presidential election, but there's some big changes that are going to be happening in the Senate, in particularly the Senate GOP leadership. And this is big news, really big news, okay? And this is something that we definitely have to gain the Senate back, even though it looks like we're going to. We must gain the Senate back into Republican control. Now, again, just to be clear, I am not Republican. But I vote Republican because Republicans align more with my values, being a strict constitutional conservative. Now, here in the Washington Examiner, Senate GOP faces leadership shakeup by anonymous vote. So here's the thing. Minority Leader Mitch McConnell has basically said that he will not be the leadership after this year. Okay. And so because of that, what has ended up happening is that now the Senate Republicans are bracing for the biggest leadership shakeup in nearly 20 years. So Mitch McConnell has been kind of in charge for quite some time in terms of that. And so McConnell pointed out, and by the way, he's 82 years old. He said earlier this year in announcing his scheduled exit as leader, he said, "I am no longer the young man sitting in the back, hoping colleagues would remember my name. It is time for the next generation of leadership." Now, Senate Republicans are slated to choose McConnell's successor, as well as other positions. Okay. It's going to be done by secret ballot after November 5th. Okay. So after November 5th, and is expected to potentially happen. Let me see. I thought I saw this earlier, but I may be missing something. Anyway, and when Congress returns for the first time since late September, committee assignments and chairs will all be decided at a later date. So after the November elections are finalized, then what you're going to end up with is you're going to end up with a vote to figure out who's going to be leading the Senate Republicans. Now, Senate Democrats are also going through the same thing, but they face far fewer changes to their leadership rungs, and they're still going to undergo their own stuff. However, they are expected to hold their elections in early December. Now, so only those serving in the next Congress and senators-elect are going to be allowed to vote. Retiring senators will not be participating. So here's the ones that they're going to go after. So first is GOP leader, which right now, Minority Whip John Thune, Senators John Corman, and Rick Scott are all three gunning for that top spot. Okay. Now, Scott is expected to capture a sizable chunk of most of the conservative wing of the conference, but he is also the underdog against the other two. The GOP whip is slated that Senator John Barrasso is running unopposed for that spot. So keep in mind, the GOP leader and then the whip. The whip is number 2. Barrasso's number 3 spot, which he currently sits, is now being sought by GOP policy chairwoman Joni Ernst and Senator Tom Cotton. And as of right now, Ernst looks like she is going to be favored to win. Then the 5th-ranked Republican in the Senate party is going to be the GOP policy chair, and right now they are Senator Shelley Moore Capito is looking to move up a rung, ascending to Ernst's spot. So Capito is running unopposed at this point. So the last two, the conference chair and the policy chair, or sorry, the whip, GOP whip and the policy chair are currently running unopposed. So we'll just have to see what's going on. Now, you also have the current National Republican Senatorial Committee Chairman, Steve Daines. He's confirmed that he has no plans to emerge as a dark horse candidate for GOP leader. He's also not vying for another cycle, being at the head of that either. So that leaves Tim Scott likely to be unopposed for the NRSC chair. So that's what's potentially going to be happening for the leadership for the party and for the GOP in the Senate. And then, of course, there's a whole bunch of committees. You can grab the link to the Washington Examiner piece in the description of this video in order to go and take a look. So there you go. Senate Democrats right now, obviously the leadership team is largely staying put, which means that we're stuck with Chucky Boy Schumer, unfortunately. And he's going to remain. His number 2 is going to be Dick Durbin, who is out of Illinois. He's going to keep his role. So they only have Debbie Stabenow. She's retiring. So Senators Cory Booker, Spartacus, anyway, and Amy Klobuchar are potentially going to be top contenders to replace her as the Democrat caucus's policy and communications chair. And then they have Kristen Gillibrand, who is another past presidential contender, is vying unopposed to become the chairwoman of the Senate Democrats campaigns arm, the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee, to be in charge there. So that's going to be interesting. But as you can see, not very many changes. So it looks like the GOP is going to get a big shakeup. So let's hope, though, that through that GOP shakeup, honestly, let's hope and pray that actually brings more balls to the party and that brings more aggressiveness to the Republican Party so that we can actually get some things done. Because make no mistake, should Trump be victorious in his quest to regain the Oval Office for 2025 and beyond, he is going to need all the help that he can get in order to take to task the government bureaucracy known as the deep state, known as the blob, and be able to take them to task and get rid of things like the idea of the Department of Education, the problems with the FBI and the Secret Service, as well as the issues that we can consistently have with the Department of Justice over top of everything. And so he is going to need congressional help with all of that, which is part of the reason why I keep saying you must go and vote down ballot. We have to get them taken care of all down ballot. Republican, Republican, Republican. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the potential lineup, let's say, or the way things will start closing down in terms of the polls. All right. So when returns start coming in, that usually means that it would be when the polls are starting to close. Now, the first two states, and it's not the full states in some of these places. I didn't even realize this, but I guess I don't know why I wouldn't. But some of these states that are on this list actually have an Eastern time zone and a Central time zone part to each one of their states. So, therefore, the very first polls that will be closing is at 6 p.m. Eastern time, 3 p.m. Pacific time here, and those will be the Eastern time regions of Indiana and Kentucky. Now, both of those are planned to be those two are planned to be going toward Trump. So that's going to be no surprise if you start seeing results coming in off that. Then after that, at 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific, we'll have the Eastern time zone region, parts of Florida, Georgia, Indiana Central time zone, Kentucky Central time zone. So that'll obviously be the hour later. Then you'll have South Carolina, Virginia, and Vermont. Those will all close at 7 p.m. Eastern time. Then at 7:30, we'll add North Carolina, Ohio, and West Virginia to that. Then I will go live at 8 p.m. Eastern time, which will coincide with the polls closing in the following states. Alabama, Connecticut, Delaware, Florida finishes. Illinois, Kansas, the Central Time region goes. Then you have Maine, Maryland, Massachusetts, Michigan's Eastern Time Zone region closes. Then you have Mississippi, Missouri, New Hampshire, New Jersey, North Dakota's Central Time will be closing. Oklahoma, Pennsylvania, Rhode Island, South Dakota's Central Time is closing. Tennessee, both time zones close. Texas Central Time region closes, and then, of course, Washington, D.C. will all close. Now, what's going to end up happening here is I'm going to go live, and there will possibly be a slew of states that will start announcing this. So the action is going to be fast and furious when I first get on board. Then it'll start to slow down a little bit because the next one at 8:30 p.m. Eastern is Arkansas. Then you will have at 9 p.m. Eastern will be Arizona, Colorado, Iowa, Kansas's mountain region, Louisiana, Michigan Central Time region, Minnesota, Nebraska, New Mexico, New York, North Dakota's Mountain Time region, South Dakota's Mountain Time region, Texas's Mountain Time region, Wisconsin, and Wyoming will all hit around 9. So the biggest portion of the states that have their polls closing will be between 8 p.m. Eastern and 9 p.m. Eastern. Now, the next set, and I'm not going to go through everything, but the next set are pretty regular on the hour. So 10 p.m. will be the next 5. Then 11 p.m. will be the next 4. And then finally at 12 a.m. we'll get Alaska's starting to come in and Hawaii's coming in. But the very final poll closing is actually at 1 a.m. Eastern time. And that will be the Alaska, Hawaii, Aleutian Island time zone region. So, yeah, so there you go. That is exactly the numbers. So we're going to start. So again, I'm going to go live at 5, which will be 8 p.m. So that'll be where a good portion of the states, the polls will have closed. And hopefully by then we'll start having some some results coming in. Now, again, keep in mind, Pennsylvania, Georgia, Michigan, they've all said that it may take days for them to actually count everything. But, yeah. So, it's going to be fast and furious. It's going to be all over. Now, I see somebody was asking whether or not my wife is going to make an appearance. Mrs. Whiskey is going to make an appearance. I don't think so, because it might be later, because she actually is going to be at a meeting. She's got a volunteer thing that she does, that she has to meet up for. All right, so here's a lie. Let's just cover this. Here's a lie that Kamala Harris has been talking about. Sorry, had to take a drink. My voice was starting to fade there. So here's a lie that Kamala Harris has been putting out. And I'm telling you, folks, the Democrats, I've never seen so many blatant lies that are so easily picked up. I mean, seriously, the whole Democrat Party, it's not just one of them. It's like, again, it's a virus. It's like a hive mind. You put the suggestion into one, and it's like the Borg from Star Trek. Once you put the suggestion into one's ear, the entire freaking thing is going to be, taken over. Palms asked, do you think the whole thing will be called tomorrow night? No, I don't. I really, really don't. I will be very shocked if it actually gets close enough to go and say that we're even close, to be honest with you. I think they'll probably hang on, especially in Democrat-run states like Michigan, Pennsylvania, things like that. I think they will try and hold things out to keep it on the down low until they can, until something else. But anyway, so the Democrats have been lying, no surprise there, but they've been lying over things like the economy. And I've pointed out, I mean, this program for the last several months has been nothing but politics, the economy, the inflation rates, so on and so forth. I've discussed all of this over the course of a long, long period of time for this. And here we are. The Nobel economists are dead wrong again, according to Hot Air. They put partisanship over economic common sense. So in the last week, Vice President Kamala Harris has been claiming that 24 Nobel economists wrote that her economic plan is going to be better for America than the Trump agenda. And she's been talking about this incessantly when it comes to the economy on all of her interviews and so on and so forth. Now, the joint letter was spearheaded by a very hyper-political Joseph Stiglitz. And Joe Stiglitz infamously flew to Caracas to endorse Hugo Chávez's economic policies back in 2007. Now, that being the case, the letter claims that Trump's economic plan would lead to higher prices, large deficits, and greater inequality. They also warn of the risk of a worldwide recession. Now, this is interesting because a lot of these people have been trying to tie this worldwide recession or worldwide inflation to us, and yet they don't seem to understand that, yeah, it is tied to us because we're the world's reserve currency currently. Anyway, so the letter also warns of a worldwide recession if Donald Trump wins. Now, this writer also states that all that was missing was the prediction of a bunch of dead puppies. Now, what actually is the case is that the economy boomed under Trump, as did the stock market. Then in 2021, many on this same Nobel economist signed a similar open letter assuring us that President Joe Biden's policies wouldn't cause inflation. It actually did. 18 months later, or actually 10 months later, after the letter came out, After 10 months later, after the inflation rate surged to its highest level, 9.1 since the Carter administration. So a lot of people have had skepticism on Trump's positions. People have talked about how tariffs are probably not going to be the best thing in the world. But what is undeniable, the writer claims here, is that the 2016 economic agenda worked like a charm, as measured by the following: a record-breaking $4,000 to $5,000 gain in real incomes for average families. Conversely, incomes are currently down in real terms under Biden and Harris. And by the way, the inflation and income inequality went down under Trump. Trump handed over a 1.4 inflation rate to Joe Biden and Kamala Harris when he left. And that his average, by the way, across the 4 years that he was in office, his average was under the 2% that the Federal Reserve targets. Now, we understand that it's virtually impossible for anyone to be correct in all of their predictions. But what's remarkable, and this is again back in the piece in Hot Air, is when it comes to Trump and Biden, they have managed to record a perfect record with their crystal balls. And they've been wrong every single time. That's their record, being wrong 100%. So they argued that Trump tariffs would cause inflation. Then they worry that the Trump tax cuts would cause inflation. But tax cuts and tax increases can't both cause inflation at the same time. So cuts and increases don't cause it. Anyway, if supply side tax cuts increase production and work, they actually lower prices, which is what exactly happened under Reagan and Trump's tax rate reductions. So once again, as I've told you, tax cuts pushes the economy forward. When you cut back taxes and regulation, it opens up the economy and allows for more revenues to come in. This is proven. It's not science. It happens. It's guaranteed. Argentina is going through that right now. They cut taxes and regulation, and what happened? He's pulled out from a huge amount of inflation, much bigger than we have even been in, and he's pulled it out. Milei has pulled it completely out at this point. Very quickly, too, I might add. So the problem here, of course, is that these people who are in charge, these Nobel laureates, have never lived in the real world. They just don't understand the real situations that occur in our economy. They just don't get it. And so things like that are going to continue. Well, here's another economic indicator that they keep freaking using, which they shouldn't, but they do. Also in the Epic Times, the GDP has a problem. Well, this one really quickly is that GDP, which is the number that we continually talk about, that's gross domestic product, and it's a number that we continually look to as an indicator as to how well the economy is actually going. Well, it supposedly only rose an annualized 2.8%, which is technically slower than the last quarter. This was for the third quarter of this past year. The problem that you have with GDP is that these figures are always reported in real terms that is adjusted for inflation. This does not happen with factory orders or retail sales, which are always reported in nominal terms. So the two terms are not lining up correctly. Okay? And so anyway, just to kind of continue on, is that we don't actually know for sure what the true inflation number is, or even a reasonable approximation of it. The data collectors exclude interest and the actual home prices of and the insurance thereof. They can't account for shrinkflation. Consumer price index also doesn't account for, which is the CPI, also doesn't account for strange added fees. Well, the GDP, just as an example, the 12,000, and I'll end with this really quickly. The 12,000 jobs that were announced this past month, the vast majority of them came from the government. And government jobs being added to GDP is actually not a domestic product. I don't even understand why government jobs are even being tied into GDP, because the government doesn't produce anything. So anyway. All right. Oh. Well, thank you for joining, because that at least got a little bit. Now I'm not all in knots yet, but I probably will be after the stream. Anyway, you can help me out, by the way, for just to head on over to rumble.com, get yourself an account. It's free, and once you get on the account, make sure that you sign in. Once you are signed in, search up the American Perspective channel and make sure you hit that green follow button. Also, do me a favor, and if you would hit those thumbs up buttons across all of my platforms, because obviously that helps raise these videos up and it gets greater exposure to the audience. Now, Palms asked over on Rumble really quickly, why don't you promote becoming a subscriber to your stream? I would like subscribers, but I'd rather get actual people viewing, because I'm trying to make it, I'm attempting to make this to where you guys aren't necessarily supporting me. If you want to, if you want to become a supporter and everything, if you want to become a subscriber, absolutely. But I don't feel like I'm quite at the level yet where it kind of warrants doing that. Okay, folks, here we go. Tomorrow night, 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern Time. Come back and join me, along with the hundreds of other pundits that are all live streaming for everything that are going on for tomorrow night. I don't blame you if you don't want to hang out with me all night. I get it. It's not a problem, but I will be here if you decide to come and join. I would love to have you. We will see you tomorrow night, election night. If you haven't gone out and voted, go out and vote. If you're going out and voting tomorrow, vote early, please. And we will see you next time on the American Perspective channel, the American Perspective with me. And have a great night, everybody.
The previous broadcast was produced and is owned by Active Eye Media LLC. All rights reserved.